stories beyond imagination.
I remember the day I signed my life away. It was supposed to be a simple contract, national service, good pay, pension, all the promises a young man dreams of. But the fine print bound me tighter than chains. Absolute secrecy under penalty of treason, it said. I told myself it was worth it. I was 23, hungry for purpose, and foolish enough to believe patriotism could shield me from regret. They told us we were serving our country, that the desert facility we would call home was protecting American skies from threats. The public could never know. Area 51 was just a joke to the outside world, a punchline whispered by conspiracy theorists. But I learned quickly that the truth is never funny. For 12 years, I gave my sweat, my health, and eventually my sanity to that place. And though the world still laughs, I can't laugh anymore. Not after level 9. On the surface, Area 51 looked like any other military base. Chain-link fences, guard towers, soldiers in desert camo, aircraft hangars housed experimental jets, sleek, black machines that defied gravity in ways our textbooks couldn't explain. That's what most newcomers believed they were protecting. Aircraft research, aerospace secrets. But as weeks turned to months, I noticed things that didn't belong. Unmarked trucks rolling in at 3 a.m., their cargo always covered. Scientists who never left the underground labs, their skin pale like ghosts. Once, I passed a man in a white coat whose eyes had no whites at all, just endless black. I convinced myself it was exhaustion, a trick of bad lighting. But deep down, I knew the surface was a mask. The real work wasn't about planes or weapons. It was about something much older, much darker. Each promotion took me deeper underground. Clearance levels were measured in floors. And with each descent, reality bent further. Level 3 was hangars, mechanics, and testing. Level 5 looked like a hospital. Sterile white rooms filled with equipment I couldn't name. I saw organs in jars, machines keeping disembodied limbs alive. By level 7, the air itself felt wrong. The walls weren't metal anymore. They looked grown, not built, their surface veined like flesh. That's when I realized we weren't just experimenting with alien life. We were integrating it into the facility itself. The base was alive in places, and the deeper you went, the louder its pulse grew. Every elevator ride, downward felt like entering the stomach of something that had swallowed us whole. Level 9 wasn't given easily. Only a handful of us ever earned that clearance, and most didn't last long. The initiation wasn't a ceremony, it was a test. You were shown things meant to break you. Images of beings that twisted logic, sounds that made your nose bleed. If you survived without screaming, you passed. I wish I had failed. The first time the scanner approved my retina and voice, the door hissed open to a corridor darker than night. Armed escorts flanked me, their faces blank, eyes glazed like they weren't fully present. I followed them past chambers sealed in glass, thicker than any submarine hull. And that's where I saw it, the nursery. The place that erased any hope I had left. The nursery wasn't a room. It was a cavern, stretching far beyond human construction. Its ceiling lost in shadows. Rows upon rows of translucent pods lined the floor, each one glowing faintly, like eggs in some monstrous hive. Inside floated things I couldn't fully process. Humanoid shapes, some small like children, others towering, their faces half-formed, their skin mottled with scales, feathers, or something in between. Tubes fed into their bodies, pumping fluids that kept them alive. They weren't specimens, they weren't prisoners. They were growing. And worst of all, some of them had faces almost human, with faint, familiar features, as if they had been made from us. One of the soldiers whispered a single word under his breath. Hybrids. And that's when I understood this wasn't research, it was replacement. The nursery wasn't empty. Across catwalks suspended above the pods, figures in lab coats moved in silence. They weren't like the scientists I'd seen on the upper levels. No chatter, no laughter, no human warmth. Their faces were pale, stretched tight, their mouths rarely moving. I never once heard them speak. They simply observed, jotting down symbols I didn't recognize on tablets that glowed with an otherworldly light. One of them paused as I passed, tilting his head slowly, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of the pods. That's when I realized they weren't observing the hybrids. They were observing me. I tried to look away to focus on the floor, but the pods demanded attention. Their glass wasn't just transparent, it shimmered faintly like water rippling. When I drew close, I heard whispers, faint and broken, as though the glass itself carried voices. Some begged for help in half-human tones. Others hissed in languages my mind could barely comprehend. I wanted to believe it was stress, auditory hallucinations. But the soldier beside me grabbed my arm. "Don't listen too long," he muttered, his face pale. "They'll know your name if you do." His grip trembled, and for a moment, I wondered if he had once listened too long himself. Beyond the nursery was a tunnel they called the Hall of Echoes. Every step echoed twice, as if someone, or something, was walking alongside you, just out of sight. The walls were lined with metal panels, each etched with symbols that shifted when you weren't looking directly at them. My escort warned me not to stare too long, but curiosity won. The markings bent, unfolded, and rearranged themselves until I recognized shapes. Maps of constellations, spirals, diagrams of bodies, both human and not. My stomach churned when I realized one of the diagrams wasn't a drawing at all. It was a moving image, the organs pulsing as though alive inside the wall itself. The tunnel ended at another vast chamber, colder than ice. In the center, suspended by chains, hung a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. Its body was emaciated, its limbs impossibly long, its head encased in a helmet of glass filled with liquid. Tubes ran from the creature's body into massive tanks that hummed with energy. I watched as one of the scientists turned a valve, and the liquid inside the tanks flushed into new pods lined against the walls. The realization hit me like a blade. The hybrids weren't only engineered, they were fed by something older, something enslaved. That thing in chains wasn't just a prisoner, it was a mother. At the far end of the chamber stood a colossal sphere of black glass, pulsing faintly with light from within. The scientists called it the Eye. No matter where I moved, it faced me. I could feel its gaze pressing against my thoughts, pulling at memories I had tried to bury. When I blinked, I saw images of Earth, not as it is, but as it was. Oceans boiling, skies torn open, creatures like the hybrids walking freely among us. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the floor, gasping for breath. One of the escorts dragged me away, whispering so softly I almost didn't hear, "Don't let it inside, or you won't come back." But I already felt it. Something had slipped in, curling around my mind like a shadow that would never leave. After that day, Level 9 haunted every moment of my life in the base. I couldn't sleep without hearing the whispers, couldn't close my eyes without seeing the Eye. The others noticed. A technician in the cafeteria grabbed my arm once and hissed, "You've been below, haven't you?" His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. "Don't eat the meat. Don't drink the water." He let go before I could reply, vanishing into the crowd of uniforms. Later that week, I learned he'd transferred. Transfers always meant the same thing, gone without trace. I began to suspect the silence around Level 9 wasn't loyalty, it was fear. Strange things began to happen in the dormitories. At night, I heard footsteps outside my room, though no patrols were scheduled. Once I woke to find my roommate standing over me, eyes open but empty, like he was sleepwalking. He whispered in a language I didn't understand, then collapsed. The next morning, he claimed no memory of it. Every week, more men disappeared. Their bunks were cleared, their names erased from duty logs, and sometimes at breakfast I swore I saw their faces, in the glass of my water. Not reflections, impressions, like their souls were trapped, screaming silently just beneath the surface. It was Dr. Keller who finally broke the silence. He was an older man, gaunt, trembling, his badge marked with the crimson triangle of level, and he cornered me in a corridor, his voice a rasp. "They'll use you too," he muttered, slipping a folded note into my hand. "Read it where no one sees." The note was written in hurried script, words smudged with sweat. It spoke of Project Chrysalis, the true goal of the nursery. Hybrids were only the beginning. The end game was assimilation, not coexistence, not study, but replacement. "They are building a new humanity," Keller had scrawled, "and we are the scaffolding." The next day, Keller was gone. His lab coat, his bunk, even his nameplate outside his office, all erased. It was as though he had never existed. But the note remained in my pocket, and with it, the weight of truth. I began watching more closely. Soldiers escorted sealed crates into the lower levels, crates that rattled as though something inside still lived. Scientists emerged with blood on their gloves, their faces blank but their eyes wet with tears. And in the cafeteria, I noticed something that froze me completely. One of the officers eating among us didn't cast a shadow. It happened 3 months later. An alarm shrieked through the base at 2 a.m., louder than any drill. Red lights pulsed, and we were ordered to arm ourselves and descend to level 9. As we marched, the ground shook violently, dust falling from the ceilings. "Containment breach," someone whispered. I didn't know what had broken free, but when the doors of level 9 hissed open, the stench of rotting air hit us like a wall. The nursery pods were shattered. Fluids covered the floor, glowing faintly. And among the wreckage, things crawled, half-formed, shrieking, dragging themselves toward us. The hybrids had awakened. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the cavern. Bullets tore into the hybrids, but they didn't die like us. Limbs bent backward. Bodies stitched themselves back together. Jaws split open wider than possible. One soldier was pulled screaming into a broken pod, his body dissolving into liquid as if the glass itself consumed him. I fired until my clip emptied. But for every creature that fell, 2 more clawed their way out of the shadows. And all the while, the eye pulsed, brighter with each death, as though it was feeding on the chaos. Then came the blackout. The lights snapped off, plunging us into total darkness. Only the faint glow of the pods lit the room, casting twisted shadows. I heard screams, some human, some not. My hands trembled as I reloaded by feel, the stench of blood thick in the air. A voice whispered my name in the dark, but it wasn't one of my men. It was my mother's voice. She'd been dead for 10 years. I nearly dropped my weapon. The eye wasn't just watching anymore, it was inside, digging through memories, reshaping voices, breaking our sanity from within. Through the chaos, I stumbled into the feeding chamber. The creature in chains was awake now, its massive body trembling, eyes glowing faintly through the liquid in its helmet. It looked at me, not with hatred, but with pity. For the first time, I realized it wasn't a prisoner. It was fuel, drained endlessly to create the hybrids. And as the base crumbled around us, I saw it stretch one withered arm toward me. Its voice thundered inside my skull. Not spoken, but implanted. "Free me, and you may yet survive." My hands moved before my mind caught up, reaching for the release valve. The valve screamed as I twisted it open. Tubes burst, liquid spraying across the chamber. The creature let out a guttural roar, shaking the walls. Chains snapped like brittle bones, and for a moment, I thought I had unleashed death itself. But instead of attacking, it turned toward the eye. With a single motion, it hurled its body against the black sphere. The ground shook as if the world itself split, and the eye cracked, shrieking like a million voices torn apart. The hybrids around us collapsed, writhing, their forms liquefying into sludge. But the victory was not mine. The creature staggered, its massive body already dissolving. With its final breath, it whispered into my mind, "Run." The facility was falling apart. Alarms wailed, corridors buckled, and ceilings collapsed as I sprinted upward. Soldiers and scientists alike ran, screaming, but none of them made it far. Some were crushed by falling steel, others swallowed by fissures opening in the floors. I reached level 5 when the power died completely, plunging everything into blackness. The silence was worse than the alarms until I heard it. Footsteps, not human. Wet, dragging footsteps following me up the stairs. The eye was gone, but something else had awakened. I ran blindly through the collapsing hallways, the sound of pursuit never far behind. I caught glimpses in the flickering emergency lights, shapes, that were neither hybrid nor human. Shadows without bodies, faces that melted when I tried to focus. I fired wildly, but the bullets passed through. They weren't flesh. They were echoes of the eye, fragments of whatever intelligence had been imprisoned here. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but adrenaline carried me upward. All I knew was this: if I didn't reach the surface, I'd never leave alive. When I finally burst through the elevator shaft into the desert night, the sky was wrong. Stars I had known my whole life were gone, replaced by constellations I didn't recognize. The air smelled sharp, metallic, like lightning before a storm. Behind me, the ground collapsed, swallowing the facility in a roar of dust and fire. I stood alone in the desert, staring at a sky that no longer belonged to Earth. And in that silence, I understood the breach hadn't been contained. The eye was broken, but the veil between worlds had torn open. Hours later, black vans arrived. Men in suits stepped out, their faces expressionless, their eyes too dark to be human. They didn't ask questions. They didn't check for survivors. They simply gathered me up, injected something cold into my veins, and whispered the words I will never forget. "You are scaffolding. You will be rebuilt." I woke 3 days later in a hospital bed. No documents, no rank, no proof I had ever served. My discharge papers claimed psychological breakdown. My name was erased from every record, but the nightmares stayed. Now, years later, I still see them. In reflections, in shadows, in the corners of my eyes. The hybrids never stopped whispering my name. Sometimes I wake at night to the sound of glass cracking, as though the nursery pods are in my bedroom. I know they'll come for me eventually. I was supposed to be scaffolding, a vessel for their rebirth. And every day I feel my body betray me, skin that crawls, eyes that ache, dreams that are not mine. I escaped the base, but not what it planted inside me.